my name is Freya Ward and this is my presentation on perspectives in psychology. So today I'm going to be talking about two psychological perspectives. I'm going to evaluate their key assumptions. I'm going to evaluate the work of key theorists relating to my two chosen perspectives. I'm then going to analyse the similarities and differences between them, and then I'm going to evaluate the application of two perspectives to contemporary issues in psychology. So, starting off, what is behaviourism? Behaviourism is a psychological perspective that focuses on the idea that all behaviours are learned through interaction human and animals have with the environment, and states that inherited factors have very little influence on behaviour. It's said that behaviourism comes from the conditioning and reinforcement from learning directly or indirectly. A common example of behaviourism is positive enforcement. For example, if a student does well on a test, they get a small treat. This then encourages the student to work hard and do well again so they get a treat on the next test. Behaviourists believe that all behaviour is learned and can therefore be unlearned. There are two main types of behaviourism. First, we have radical behaviourism. This is learning from a stimulus or response mechanism. For example, in Pavlov's dog experiment, which I will go more into later, when he rang a bell without food present, the dog would salivate, simply from being conditioned to associate the bell with food. Then we have social learning. This is learning from observation and imitating the behaviour of others, like copying a role model. For example, a child copying a family member or even a television character. What is biological psychology? Biological psychology perspective focuses on the idea of genetic inheritance and neural functioning in understanding the basis of human behaviour. It's the only approach in psychology that examines thoughts, feelings and behaviours from a biological point of view. First, you have physiology. This is how the nervous system and hormones work, how the brain functions, and how changes in the function can affect behaviour. For example, how prescribed drugs to treat depression affect behaviours through their effect on the nervous system. Then you have inheritance. So this is what an animal inherits from its parents. For example, whether high intelligence is inherited from one generation to another. Here are some key assumptions of behaviourism. Behaviourism is based on the idea that all behaviours are learnt through conditioning, which occurs from environmental interaction. This was founded by John B. Watson in the early 20th century, and assumptions follow below. Behavioural psychology examines behaviours that can be observed and measured. He argued that thoughts, feelings and desires cannot be directly observed and therefore should not be a part of psychological study. His next assumption is that our behaviours are primarily acquired through interactions with the environment. This links to the nurture approach, which I will expand on later. The next assumption is that since animals and humans demonstrate comparable learning patterns, findings from an animal experiment can link to humans. And then you have the behavioural perspective conducts experiments mainly lab controlled, which are in line to its objective and scientific approach. Here are some strengths and limitations. Starting with strengths, you have scientific credibility. All lab experiments are controlled, therefore there is little room for biased judgment or external variables to affect the study's objective. Then we have carrying on with our strengths. We have classical and operant conditioning. These two concepts are used in psychology. Classical conditioning can be used to treat phobias, autism and schizophrenia. Operant conditioning can be used for positive reinforcement, for example again to engage students to motivate them to work hard. And then we have animal research. Many crucial discoveries were made using animals as research subjects. Then going on to limitations. First we have our biological factors. This approach eliminated certain biological factors as explanations for learning and performance behaviour. For example, OCD and depression aren't taken in consideration as having an effect on low serotonin. Then we have cognitive processes. This theory doesn't consider internal cognitive processes such as memory, decision-making and problem-solving, which are more than likely to affect the shaping of human behaviour. Therefore, it is criticised as a reductionist approach. Then we have it being deterministic. Critics have argued that behaviourism is narrow-minded as it only focuses on observable behaviours as deemed important. It neglects the idea of free will as it mainly focuses on the idea of the environment shaping our behaviour and not allowing individuals to make conscious decisions independently. Next, we have key assumptions of biological psychology. This perspective believes that our thoughts and behaviours are determined by our biological structure, so things such as our neurons, our brain regions, neurotransmitters or genes. Some key assumptions of biological approach follow below. There is a direct correlation between brain activity and cognition. It suggests biochemical imbalances can affect behaviour. It assumes that behaviour is inherited and that our brain function is localised, meaning certain functions have certain areas within the brain. It assumes traits and behaviours are genetic and inherited from our parents. They are handed down from one generation to another for survival in the natural environment. I'm now going to talk about some strengths and limitations. So the strengths are as it's scientific. It is a very scientific approach because the experiments used are measurable and objective. Tests can also be easily repeated for reliability. Then we have that it's deterministic. It increases the likelihood of being able to treat someone with abnormal behaviour and can help provide an explanation as what is causing the behaviour. Then we have scanning equipment. Scanning research techniques are useful for investigating brain function. For example, EEGs can be used to analyse our sleep and wake cycles, and fFMRI machines highlight areas of the brain being used during specific actions. However, there are certain limitations. Some say it's too simple. The biological approach simplifies humans too much. External factors play a huge part in influencing our behaviour, and a single biological treatment may not be a sufficient fix. It also has reduced accountability. The determinism concept questions whether individuals can be held accountable for their behaviour if it's determined by our genetics. Then we have individual differences. The biological approach does not take into consideration individual differences among people. It develops theories about disorders and applies them to everyone, and ignores the fact that us humans are unique. So I'm now going to talk about some key theorists in behaviourism. First you have John B. Watson. He was known as the father of behaviourism, as he thought that psychology should focus on behaviour that can be observed and not internal mental processes such as thoughts, feelings and emotions. He was known for his famous experiment, Little Albert, which was conducted in the 1920s. He wanted to find out if emotions like fear were innate or whether they were learnt over time. He took a 9-month-old infant who initially didn't exhibit any fear towards a variety of animals. He showed a particular interest and positive behaviour towards a rat, so he used that for the basis of the experiment. He then conditioned Albert to fear the white rat. When presenting the rat to Albert, he would strike a metal bar with a hammer to produce a loud noise, which scared Albert and caused him to cry and crawl away from the rat. Over time, Albert was conditioned to fear the rat without the noise present, but due to the fact he associated the rat with the fearful noise. So, evaluation of this experiment. Although this experiment had provided insights into human behaviour, critics have questioned whether conditioning occurred due to flaws in the method. Some people also thought it was unethical to expose an infant to such fear and distress at a young age. They also thought the sample size was too small, just one infant. Next we have another key theorist in behaviourism, Ivan P. Pavlov. He was a Russian psychologist known for his study of a classical conditioning. He believed that behaviours can be learned through the association between different stimuli. So his key contribution to psychology was his famous experiment with dogs. He paired a neutral stimulus, the sound of a bell, with the presentation of food. After repeatedly pairing the bell and food, the dog learnt to associate the sound of the bell with food. Eventually, when the food was taken out of the equation, the dog had been conditioned to salivate at just the sound of the bell. This experiment shows how a neutral stimulus can teach a learned response when repeatedly paired with an unconditioned stimulus. Although his work has been highly regarded as experiments have given insight into how phobias can be developed through classical conditioning, it has been argued that complex human actions such as thinking and memory weren't taken into consideration. It also assumes people have little control over their responses to stimuli. There are also limitations to the experiment, and it is questioned whether the use of animals fully reflects the complexity of human behaviour. Next we have B.F. Skinner. He was an American psychologist and behaviourist best known for his work on operant conditioning. He believed that a person is exposed to a stimulus which evokes a response, and then that response is reinforced. This leads to the conditioning of human behaviour. He carried out an experiment on rats, where he investigated their feeding responses by placing them in what was known as a Skinner box. This is a puzzle type of box. Over time, it recorded the rats' behaviour, where they would get rewarded or punished for engaging in specific behaviours. The Skinner box identified 3 responses: neutral operants, reinforcers, and punishers. Although Skinner's work largely contributed to the development of psychology and helped establish operant conditioning principles, Many critics feel his theory relies heavily on animal research and again question whether it can be generalised to complex human behaviour. It also focuses on simple stimulus response and doesn't consider cognitive factors. Next we have the key theorists in biological psychology. Broca and Wernicke, the localisation of function theory. Localisation of function is the theory that certain areas of the brain are responsible for certain mental functions, processes and behaviours. Broca and Wernicke proposed the theory in the 19th century and discovered that specific brain areas were responsible for language production and comprehension. Previous to this discovery, it was believed that all parts of the brain were involved in processing thoughts and behaviours. The brain is split into two hemispheres, and each hemisphere controls the opposite side of the body. The language centre is localised to the left hemisphere and contains two main areas, the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area. These are named after the scientists who discovered them. First we have the Broca's area. This is located in your left frontal lobe and is mainly responsible for language production and speech. Damage to this area would result in slow speech that lacks fluency. Research in this area was conducted on a patient called Louis, who was given a nickname of Tan, as this was one of the few words he could say. After Tan's death in 1861, Broca conducted a post-mortem on his brain, which revealed a lesion on the left frontal lobe. This area was termed the Broca's area and has been crucial in developing our understanding on brain localisation. Next you have Wernicke's area. This is located to the posterior part of the left temporal lobe and primarily responsible for the language comprehension and understanding. Its role is to process and understand spoken as well as written language. Damage to this area can result in incoherent speech that may be rapid but make no sense. Speech could be fluent but word choice could be unusual and lack meaning, also known as word salad. Wernicke's theory comes from observing patients with language disorders. By conducting post-mortem examinations, he identified a number of lesions in the posterior part of the left temporal lobe and correlated these with symptoms of Wernicke's aphasia. We can use their findings to identify the areas. For example, Peterson et al. 1988 used brain scanning to demonstrate how the Wernicke area was active during a listening task, whereas the Broca's area was active during a reading task. However, critics feel there is a more complicated process involving a range of different brain networks. For example, there are some studies that show the Wernicke's area play a role in both the production and the comprehension of speech. What are the similarities and differences of behaviourism and biological psychology? First, we have nature versus nurture. So, biological psychology heavily believes that our behaviour is shaped by factors we inherit, such as our genes, hormones, and the structure of our brains, whereas behaviourism believes that nurture has a lot to answer for. Nurture refers to the factors in our environment, such as our upbringing, experiences, and our social interactions in life. Then we've got determinism versus free will. Both behaviourism and biological psychology are hard determinists. They both agree that all behaviour is determined by forces out of an individual's control. In behaviourism, this includes external environmental influences, and in biological psychology, this accounts for genetic predispositions. It further suggests that all behaviour are the result of a specific cause and therefore predictable, and neither of them believe in free will. Next, we have reductionism versus holism. Both behaviourism and biological psychology are reductionists. This means they break down behaviour into small and simple components. They study behaviour in isolated elements. Reductionists seek to establish cause and effect relationships and use quantitative data, although this sometimes overlooks the bigger picture. Next, we have their research methods. Both behaviourism and biological psychology use empirical research. This is research that uses scientific and statistical methods to collect data. This research commonly takes place in a laboratory. Here is a table of a brief overview of their similarities and differences. Next, we have contemporary issues in psychology. Contemporary issues are opportunities and issues that have relevance in present-day life. They can be categorised as social, economic, environmental, and ethical. I'm going to talk about how my two chosen perspectives in psychology can be applied to the following contemporary issues. You have your mental health and well-being, diversity and inclusion, and you have workplace and organisational issues. Let's talk about mental health and well-being from a biological perspective. With psychology being defined as the science of the mind, it's obvious why psychology and mental health are closely linked to one another. Psychology research concepts such as stress, anxiety, depression, and resilience. In this approach, treatments include medication and other biological interventions for conditions like bipolar, depression, and schizophrenia. Medication can include antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, mood stabilizers, and antipsychotics. The strengths of this is that medication can provide symptom relief for various mental health conditions. Medication can also produce quick results, and medication can be used in conjunction with other therapies such as CBT. However, there are some limitations. Many medications do come with side effects. There also may be withdrawal symptoms if the medication is stopped abruptly. And medication can only suppress issues. They do not address the underlying cause of mental health conditions. Next, we have diversity and inclusion from a behaviourism's perspective. Diversity is recognising and understanding that there are people from a range of different backgrounds, including social, ethnic, genders, and sexual orientation. Inclusion is providing equal access to opportunities for everyone, including those who otherwise may be excluded, for example, those with physical or intellectual disabilities or those from minority groups. Psychologists are concerned with the concepts of bias, prejudice, and discrimination and want to use their findings to gain a better understanding of them. A main theory of behaviourism is observational learning. This can be used to reduce discrimination and improve inclusion. Positive role models in settings such as schools and workplaces, for example, such as teachers and business leaders, can help ensure inclusive behaviours are demonstrated and help influence others too. Again, these come with strengths and limitations. So, strengths of this is that positive role models can inspire individuals to adopt similar attitudes and actions, and observing inclusive behaviours can lead to a social norm that supports diversity and inclusion. However, observational learning alone may not be enough to create a lasting change and may require other factors to reinforce the inclusive practices. I think my slides got slightly messed up. Workplace and organisational issues from a biological perspective. Workplace and organisational issues can include problems for employee motivation, leadership styles, teamwork, and work-life balance. However, there are strategies that can improve the workplace, creating better productivity and job satisfaction. The biological perspective encourages well-being initiatives to address issues such as stress and burnout. A popular example is mindfulness. This is a meditation technique which allows us to be fully present, aware of where we are and what we are doing. Strengths of this is that it reduces stress, improves mental health, improves our relationships and our physical health. However, it can require a lot of time and commitment, which could be difficult for someone to fit into a busy work schedule. And it again does not address the cause of workplace stress and burnout, only suppresses. This is workplace and organisations from a behaviourism perspective. So reinforcing positive behaviours through recognition and rewards can help to improve an employee's motivation, performance and morale. This uses the principle of operant conditioning, where an employee receives a reward for their positive behaviours. They are more likely to feel valued and motivated with their work. This positive reinforcement increases the likelihood that they repeat those behaviours again. Strengths of this is that it improves motivation and performance, it creates a positive work culture where employees feel valued, and increases job satisfaction and retention. However, again, it doesn't address the underlying issues that lead to low employee morale and performance. And if not done fairly, it may cause resentment among colleagues. This can create a competitive atmosphere rather than a collaborative one. So to summarise, I've discussed my two perspectives in psychology, behaviourism and biological. I have evaluated their key assumptions. I have evaluated the work of the key theorists in relation to my two perspectives, and I have analysed the similarities and differences between them. Finally, I have evaluated the application of them to contemporary issues in psychology. Thank you for listening.